Hello everybody and welcome back to Screen Stars and welcome to another classic film review. And the next person I have chosen to do my 3 classic film reviews on is Steven Seagal. Quite a controversial actor, action star I suppose you could say. But a lot of people forget that actually in his day he made a lot of pretty good action films in the 80s and 90s, despite what his film catalogue has said over the last decade or so. So I was a big fan of Steven Seagal back in the day in my youth. I really loved his action films. So I thought I would see if I can do 3 classic film reviews of my favourite Steven Seagal films, and I will finish that off as usual with a top 10 list of my favourite Steven Seagal films. And the first one I have chosen is 1990's Marked for Death, a film that was directed by Dwight H. Little. Stars obviously Steven Seagal. We have Joanna Pacula, we have Basil Wallace as the fantastic bad guy Screwface, and we have Keith David as Max. Now then, this was, I think, according to IMDb, this was his second film. His first film was Nico, and I always thought Hard to Kill was his second film. Even though this and Hard to Kill came out in the same year, 1990. So I think it depends on where you lived. This was either his second or third film. And this is arguably my favourite Steven Seagal film, potentially. I used to watch this all the time when I was a kid. This focuses on Steven Seagal's character, John Hatcher, who is a CIA agent who is burnt out. You see at the beginning of the film he goes on this mission, doesn't go according to plan, and he comes home, he's had enough, he's burnt out, he's fed up, he doesn't feel as though he's making any difference at all. So he quits his job and he moves back to his hometown. There he runs into his ex-army friends, Keith David, Max, who is the high school football coach now. He meets up, I think it's his sister, who is played by Elizabeth Grayson, Melissa, and everything's going swimmingly. He's settling into home life, he's relaxing as he needs to, but all of a sudden there is like a Jamaican drug war takes place in the streets of where he lives. He initially tries to ignore it until it becomes personal. Then he vows to get involved with Keith David, and they vow to take down the infamous villainous Screwface, played by Basil Wallace. And he does this on American soil, and then he heads over to Jamaica to try and finish the job over there. So that's the basic premise of this film here. Pretty simple plot, as you could imagine for a film of its time. Now, I think there's a few things that make this film really good. I initially saw this and I saw like the cut version, so a lot of the brutality was cut out. Now if you see versions of it now, the full uncut version, it's absolutely brutal. What he does to some of these characters in this film, I mean really brutal stuff. I've always been a fan of Aikido, Steven Seagal's martial arts. Martial art purists are not hugely much of a fan of it really, but I always thought it translated brilliantly to screen. And Steven Seagal always did okay in these type of movies. Certainly early on in his career, he was, you know, it wasn't the worst actor I've ever seen, put it that way, even though I'm never going to say he's a good actor because he has his limitations, shall we say. But I don't think you can really question how good it looks on screen, the martial arts that he does. It's brutal, and the action is fantastic in this film. And I think the reason why this is arguably my favourite Steven Seagal film, or certainly well up there, is Basil Wallace as Screwface, who plays a brilliant bad guy, and arguably his best bad guy he's ever faced in one of his films. Some would say Tommy Lee Wallace in Under Siege, or Gary Busey. You could probably find 2 or 3 examples, but for me I think Screwface is the best baddie he's ever faced. I mean really cool, frightening baddie, and the performance was brilliant by Basil Wallace. So yeah, a really, really good action film. It is of its time. If you watch it again now, there are elements of it that are dated. It does feel a little bit old-fashioned in its approach to action, but it still works. It absolutely still works. And I thought actually the pairing of Steven Seagal and Keith David was a bit of a stroke of genius. Keith David doesn't actually do an awful lot in this film. Most of the action is left to Seagal. He does enough to, you know, come away from the film being a little bit of a badass, but he really carries the weight in regards to the acting in this film, Keith David, and he supports Steven Seagal really well. And when he has got somebody like that in the film, Steven Seagal, somebody to bounce off, and somebody that a reasonable amount of chemistry there, it works. And I think Keith David was really, really good in this film because he was happy to take the support role. He was happy for Seagal, if you like, to, you know, take on all the action and get all the plaudits that way, and Keith David walks away with the acting plaudits here in this film. So it's a really strong action film, regardless of what you think of Steven Seagal now and some of the dross he has put out over the last few years. Just look back at his early catalogue. His first 9 or 10 films, and there's some bloody good action films in there, and they stand toe to toe with action stars of the time, and I'm talking about the Van Dammes, the Dolph Lundgrens, even Stallone at the times, you know, these and Chuck Norris films, you know, they can stand next to them quite easily. And for me, I've got fond memories of many of Steven Seagal's films. So Marked for Death is certainly one to watch. If you look at Steven Seagal's career now and you think he's a bit of a joke, well, you need to check out some of his earlier films, and this would be certainly one I would recommend you checking out, and you will see why he was a relevant star in the early days, in the late 80s, early 90s. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. It's a solid action film and certainly worth checking out. So next week, check back in. I shall do another classic Steven Seagal film, and of course I shall see you very soon on Screen Stars.